So today I wanted to share one of my hobbies that I feel has such a substantial impact on my mental health and well-being, and that is gardening. Initially I didn't really like gardening because it was messy, a bit with bugs, I thought it was boring, I didn't like going outside. But I started out by buying a few houseplants when I moved, then starting a small succulent collection, and eventually spiraled into gardening all sorts of things. So basically this video is like an advertisement for gardening. I want to share some studies on how gardening is a beneficial hobby, and I'm going to go through some advantages of having gardening as a low maintenance, flexible and easy to get into hobby. So first of all, several studies actually found that green spaces significantly increase well-being. One study found that living close to greenery improves life satisfaction and lowers psychological distress, whereas living in a more urban area actually affects well-being in a more negative way. Another study found that just by walking in a green area such as a park, you can get an increase in mood and improve your attention, memory and learning. And that's in comparison to walking in a more urban area like a city street. And finally, another study found that having just a plant near your workplace improved concentration and attention levels in office workers. Now, I don't see why that doesn't apply to students. I would really recommend to get a study buddy in form of a plant right next to you where you work. And mainly this benefit is because of the way plants capture our attention. Instead of having to be more vigilant and attentive when navigating like a busy street, or staring, concentrating, focusing on this one spreadsheet on the screen, that depletes our cognitive resources. Whereas on the other hand, nature captures our more undirected attention and it allows our focus to rest. And sure, we can get this benefit just by walking in the park, that's good too. But having and taking care of plants, even just a couple, can be really beneficial. And in fact, a review of gardening-based mental health interventions found that people actually reduced their anxiety and depression symptoms after that intervention. And so yeah, like in my opinion, gardening has such great benefits for your mental health. And it's perfect for people who don't have a lot of time or money or energy to spend. So I'm gonna go into why that is. And so first of all, gardening is really easy to get into. You can start of course by reading books on gardening, reading up on soil types, trying to figure out all the different nutrients that a plant needs. But you really don't need to do that. You can just start straight away by either buying a few houseplants or planting something. You may notice I use gardening as a very loose term here. I really believe gardening can be anything from very simple, taking care of a few houseplants and just watering and repotting it from time to time, to of course doing things like grafting different things together and trying to breed different types of citruses. And so all those skills for how to take care of a plant, they're really easy to learn, especially when you get easy to care for plants, of course. And then after a while you start to kind of learn to recognize what each plant kind of needs based on how it looks. And of course you can delve even further into more complicated stuff, but there's really no need. I started off just by remembering rough watering types for each type of plant, like a succulent or ivy. So like I knew that succulents don't need to be watered regularly compared to indoor plants, for example. And then I tried to reposition them around the house in places where they wouldn't die. And then next I started looking up tutorials for how to propagate different types of plants. And that leads me to the next advantage. Gardening is really cheap. Whilst you can easily spend hundreds of dollars on expensive plants, you can still roughly control how much, or try to anyway, how much you are willing to spend on this hobby. So this makes it a lot easier to get into rather than hobbies such as photography. You need a camera, or doing some sculpting, you need the materials to do. Gardening, you don't really need that much to start off with. I think at the bare minimum you can buy a couple of plants, and if it's a plant like a succulent, then you can easily propagate it and make more, which of course would require some soil and something to dig it with. If you have soil on your property, that's great. For easy to care plants, just plain soil is fine. Otherwise, like potting mix, you can get like some cheap versions, and in my experience they worked fine. If you live in a small apartment and you can't really have soil inside realistically, then you could totally work with established plants or even delve a bit further into non-soil mediums. And I'll get a bit more into that later. Pots, they can range anywhere from $1 to $50, but actually you can use pretty much anything as a pot. You really don't even need to buy them. The internet is full of ideas for different things you can use as planters. And now with plants, you have to kind of weigh up whether you're willing to take a more mature plant and you don't want to wait for it to grow up big, but it's more expensive, or start with a smaller plant or even seeds and wait a much longer time, but it is much cheaper. Starting from seeds is probably the cheapest choice, but some plants are really hard to grow and others just take a really long time. So it just depends how patient you are and how willing you are to invest into kind of like the baby plant. And of course you can easily buy and swap plants and cuttings from places like the Facebook Marketplace, and that can be a really cost-effective way to get your hands on some expensive or rare plants. And it can become like a fun kind of hobby of where you're almost like collecting Pokemon, where instead of Pokemon you're collecting cuttings and trying to plant them all. And another reason why this hobby is cost-effective and economical is because you can actually use a lot of the plants. So killing two birds with one stone essentially. Things with like succulents and other indoor plants, a lot of them can be easily propagated, and you can make like little arrangements or just simply give them to a friend. But if you have like herbs, vegetables, fruit, any other edible plant, they can easily supplement your grocery shop. I think this is really useful when it comes to herbs, because they tend to be really expensive when they're fresh, and I always end up only using just a little bit and the rest having to go to waste or getting all dried up and not very nice. But this way in my garden I can just go and snip off how much I need and it regrows and I'll never run out. And another benefit of growing edible plants is the taste. Everything I've grown, even though like it tends to be really small and tiny, and there's usually not a lot of it to make just one dish, it usually tastes still so amazing and it's so worth it. It's so fresh and flavoursome, and living like in the city, I guess, it's almost like I've gone and taken a little trip to the farm and gotten like fresh produce from the countryside. And of course it's so rewarding to eat something that you grew and you watched coming from like a little plant. And then of course plants are decoration, and if you have like a little space or just a few houseplants around, you can use your created green space to just hang out and either make it into like a kind of work area or just a place to relax. And also like all of this makes gardening a very environmentally friendly hobby. Like even just the nature of it is that you're planting something. It definitely encourages you to recycle. You can use eggshells as fertilizer, cartons as planters, recycle containers, jars for pots. There are small kitchen composts as well that you can use to throw your food scraps in and then later put it into your garden, and that really improves the health of your plants and you don't have to throw your food into the rubbish bin. And if you're planting things in the ground, then this increases the biodiversity of the soil. And like many plants, like flowers especially, they can be really beneficial because they encourage bees to come in. And of course, especially if you're living like in a city where there's not many green spaces, it's, I think, very beneficial for the environment to at least create that kind of space where at least some animal life can reside in. And the time commitment for gardening can be great for people who don't have a lot of time to spare. So gardening doesn't require a huge time commitment if you don't want to invest in it that much time. So which is really, as I've said before, it's really great for people who are busy. So like for me, during busy periods like exams, I only provide very basic care to plants, just watering basically. And then when I have more time, I start reporting them, I start planting new stuff, taking care of them more basically. And another like benefit that I like about gardening is that it's not very time sensitive. Like if you miss a day or two not watering a plant, that's totally fine, unless you have a very finicky plant. And there's a lot of leeway as to when you plant. You don't have to do it at the start of spring. It can be like maybe just a couple of weeks after, or maybe a month into spring. I found that they all work relatively fine, especially if you live indoors or if you live in a more temperate climate. So yeah, there's a lot of leeway as to when to plant, prune, and harvest things, so you can easily adapt it to your schedule. But I guess likewise, potential downside to this is that it is a very long-term hobby, so there's a lot of waiting around for plants to grow. Like, it takes around maybe a week for seeds to sprout and before you can actually plant them in, and then, you know, another week or two before they actually come up into little seedlings, and several months before you see any fruit. So if you like to see instant progress in something, then perhaps this hobby could be a bit too slow and boring for you. But still, I think it's a great passive hobby to have, and the joy of seeing a new leaf appear, your plant change just over months and years makes it worth it, I think. And finally, you can adapt your garden to fit your space. So obviously with an outside garden, you can make garden beds or have an off-the-ground kind of containers. But if you live in an apartment, you can have a little herb and veggie garden on your balcony. And if you don't have a balcony, there's still plenty of options. You can do little containers of herbs or some plants that don't have a lot of roots on your windowsill. Some people use non-soil methods such as like hydroponics or growing it in peat moss. So I suggest to just have a look around on Pinterest, Google, to see what can work for you. And there's plenty of variety of plants that can be great indoors. And some plants barely require any root space and are perfect for limited space. Some herbs like basil, they can just sit in water. And then of course, with the size of the pot and some pruning, you can easily have total control over the size of the plant. And so I guess what I want to highlight with these benefits is that gardening is incredibly flexible hobby, and you have like a big choice in how much or how little money, space, effort and time you want to spend into it. And I think that's really important for self-care, is to have a hobby that you can do that is adjustable to your energy levels and your circumstances. For me, like, I know when I'm close to burning out, the last thing I want to do is something effortful and time-consuming, like a DIY project, or even reading a book is sometimes so tiring. And so gardening gives me a way to relax and think about something else without much effort required from me. And taking care of something gives you something to look forward to. It's so encouraging to see things grow, especially when spring first started and everything starts growing so rapidly. It gave me a lot of motivation when I was doing my thesis. Even though my thesis didn't seem to progress much, at least my plants were growing, and I knew that once I finished with everything, I can enjoy my garden a bit more. And I can look forward to taking care of things, starting to clean them up, and of course eating the things that I grew. So I hope that you enjoyed this video and that I managed to convince some of you to take up gardening. Thank you for watching.